what got you interested in medicine all those years ago? What made you want to become a doctor?
Well, I like attributing it back to my parents, really. My mother was a director of nursing when she retired from medicine, so I grew up in a hospital setting, and I'm extra proud of that because growing up in Virginia and moving to New York City, because of the color of her skin, she had been told she'd never be able to be a nurse or a teacher or any professional that she wanted to, and was sent to a school that wouldn't allow her to have that happen. And she went to her own night school instead and persevered on her own, getting her own college credits, getting her own registered nurse degree, master's of public administration, and retired as director of nursing. So that was one. And then my father, who passed away unfortunately when I was 11, used to say when I was a little girl, she's going to be a doctor someday. And I actually didn't know that until I was in medical school.
Wow.
So I'd say those, and certainly God, are huge influences into why I ultimately went on to become a doctor. And then it's just a fun story beyond that on why I chose infectious diseases and internal medicine and pediatrics and ultimately public health, which all ties in so perfectly. And I wouldn't change it for the world.
When you made the decision to pursue infectious disease, public health, did you ever think you would find yourself in the middle of a global pandemic running a state health department?
Well, interestingly enough, I was drawn to public health when the last pandemic was here, H1N1, and really was introduced to just so many of my heroes in public health when I walked into our emergency operations center downstairs at the department. And Dr. David Gifford is the director, took me under his wings, and all of the team here embraced me, and I never looked back from knowing the impact that you can have at a population level within public health. So you certainly hope that you don't have too many pandemics in your career, and you can never imagine what each additional pandemic is going to be like. So I wouldn't say it was a total surprise, but it was also something that no one could have imagined.
Yeah, take me back to February, maybe even January of last year. When did you start to get a sense this thing is coming and it's probably going to end up here before we know it?
Likely around that February time, prior to us having our own case. Many of us within the public health world began to have memories of our H1N1 days and the 23-hour days that were spent and a tremendous amount of work and energy. We activated our COVID-19 task force prior to our first case. We activated our incident command system prior to our first case. So in that mid-February timeframe was when we began gearing up for thinking that it was going to likely be similar to what we experienced before. This certainly has ended up being 100-fold more significant or extensive than what we dealt with in 2009. But that was when we began to have the hints that this was coming.
And when you got the news that the first case had been identified, what went through your mind?
It's here. We spoke for a while prior to that happening that it was going to happen, not an if, but a when. And so when it did happen, it was that confirmation, and we were ready at that point, for what we understood to be coming. We had prepared for weeks and weeks. Our state health laboratory had done a phenomenal job accelerating their work to be able to identify it earlier than before. And we knew how to engage with our partners. So it was, time when our first case arrived.
Looking back on the past year, what stands out to you as a particularly good day?
So good days on the work side really just entailed the esprit de corps of our staff and of the team overall, of people just encouraging each other. Many people have spent countless hours long into the night, shed tears, sacrificed with their families. But to be able to uplift each other and still encourage, or to hear a phone call from a Rhode Islander who's expressing thank you and appreciation. We've had a few of those messages come through. Using those moments to continue to motivate ourselves that this is why we are doing this. This is why we, are privileged to have this opportunity. Really has made the difference. And it's challenging when you can't actually embrace. That used to be something that really helped us in prior emergencies, because you could just all bunker down together and make sure each other is eating and look each other in the eye and make sure they're doing okay. And so you had to become more creative in doing that. And just to see the commitment, the heart, the dedication of so many people in this response really has made my day. My own, on the personal side, has just certainly been time with my husband and my now 20-month-old who just can melt away any pandemic-related concerns that are going on in the blink of an eye, or just with a smile or a kiss. So that has certainly kept me through this entire time.
I wanted to ask you about your son. In 10, 15, 20 years, when he comes to you and says, hey mom, 2020, what was that like? Where were you? What did you do? What do you hope to be able to tell him?
I hope to be able to say that I was part of an amazing team that really helped lead our state in giving our all to make sure that Rhode Islanders were cared for, in acknowledging those who we have lost, but doing everything we can to prevent any further lives lost, prevent any further hospitalizations, and that I was alongside a governor and an entire team and colleagues at the state level, at every level, who really answered the call that we needed to answer, and that he, as a baby that's oblivious to everything that's going on, did everything to help keep me going every single day. So he was a big part of it as well, of course, as well as my husband and our family.
You talked about the camaraderie, the heart, and the dedication of the folks as being a positive thing. We know that 2020 was a year of challenges. What was a particularly hard day to get through that sticks out in your mind?
There have been many of those. Certainly, the longer days really would connect with, when you do public health work, so much of the work that's done has to happen kind of behind the scenes. And what happens in the forefront is a critical piece to public health, how we message it, how we describe the context of what's going on. But it's challenging to talk about, well, these are the logistics that went into play, and these are the questions that we had, and the data that we had to pull together. So some of the longer days may have been times when people were rightfully concerned or questioned or even angry about what they were experiencing. And I had to acknowledge that because they didn't necessarily want to hear the concerns about, the logistics or the data or the amount of hours that went into trying to make that not be their experience. So you still have to keep going. You still have to be confident in the system that's built and the heart and the commitment of the people who drive it, while understanding when people are frustrated or concerned or ask questions, and do our best to respond to that.
I wanted to ask you about all of the media attention that you've received. I mean, you've been out in the forefront of these press briefings now the entire time. Sometimes the press has a certain way of asking the questions. What has all of that been like for you to navigate, and has it been frustrating at times to hear that pushback?
It certainly can be, but you also understand, where it's coming from. I think some of the frustration is just not being able to fully explain, all of the background, because then people would understand a little bit better. But sometimes that's not even important. It's really about just making sure that we are responding. And a part of public health, and particularly this role, is being able to communicate effectively and do that in the midst of a crisis. As part of the Association for State and Territorial Health Officials, ASTO, a national organization that I was a past president of, some of the initial introduction to stepping into this role included, how will you engage with the media, and what does, the crisis, media crisis response look like, and how can you communicate accurately and be transparent, and also quick in being able to share what's going on. So it's funny, some of the role-playing sessions to teach were like, this may never happen, but what if you're da-da-da, and so often it just happened during this response. So you think back on some of those, and even more times when you're preparing, and you have to go with it. I mean, it's part of the journey. You see, Governor Raimondo is amazing at being able to do it, and we look forward to working with the incoming Governor McKee, and we'll just keep going, because it's really about doing what's needed for Rhode Islanders and for the people.
Looking back on the past year, I know you had to make some hard decisions. Hindsight is 20/20, so knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time and change something, what would that be? Do you have any regrets?
I wouldn't say regrets. There are definitely lessons learned, which are important. It would be a problem if I said, no, everything was fine, or we didn't learn anything. We've absolutely learned, and I've expressed it to our team that our goal is to come out stronger on the other side of this. And for myself, I've wanted to make sure that I shift my own DNA, so that these are lessons learned that I carry with me going forward, and I don't have to learn them again in the future. But there are always questions of how can I be more assertive in making the case for what's needed from a public health standpoint, or in advocating for the team, or in helping the team understand that there's another approach to how we can do this, or setting myself up for success and being able to balance everything. So these are lessons that I definitely intend to bring with me over the course of my career.
Yeah, how has this experience changed you personally and professionally?
In many ways, definitely in many ways. I'd say the most prominent, I think having lost my father at a young age, it already taught me to have a sense of appreciation just for what you have and for life, and not taking things for granted. So I already had an element of that, and certainly the pandemic really strengthened that understanding. Even on the toughest days, I still am blessed and thankful, to have a family, to have loved ones, to have a job, to be able to fulfill a purpose that I'm able to respond to. So looking at those blessings are just so critical during times like this, and having some foundation and, family and faith and loved ones and coworkers to rely on and encourage each other is always key. So that's something that I am strengthened now and going forward, in making sure that I continue to stay grounded in and always keep things in perspective, even when days may get unique or interesting. And then always being able to maintain understanding of who I am in decision making, and knowing that there are going to be different inputs, and those need to be taken into account, but also being able to stay steady in what I feel is important and be able to speak to that. So that's something that I am thankful to have grown in and look forward to taking with me in the future as well.
Speaking of the future, if you and I are sitting here 1 year from today, what do you hope life looks like?
Well, I definitely hope that vaccination for COVID is a normal part of everyone's everyday routine, that the majority of our population has been vaccinated and we're able to go forward interacting and engaging with each other, but taking with us some of the advances that we've gained. There are some conferences that can just be by Zoom now instead of having to travel or go in person. But also looking post-COVID at what we can do to make sure we bounce forward after this. And so when I really think about our communities of color and our communities that have been on the front lines and disproportionately hit hardest by COVID, that is not a surprise. It was what we have talked about prior to COVID in addressing determinants of health and making sure that there are investments at the community level to help ensure, regardless of the zip code that you're from, that you have access to quality education and schools, to good job opportunities, to good housing. I am hopeful that both from a race equity as well as from a health equity standpoint, a year from now we're able to take not only the lessons learned but the investments to really build into our communities and ability to ensure that with the next adversity or the everyday adversities, that every community equitably has the resources they need to respond appropriately, that their education and their schools have what's needed and are, in quality buildings and have the supplies and equipment that they need to make sure that their children are most equipped. And across the board, housing, nutrition, transportation, access, employment opportunities, all of those are what I'm hopeful going forward we can use to uplift both community health and our economy's health to be strengthened in the future.